for every Spider-Man line that gets released. One thing is for certain, every Spider-Man in his original costume most likely will get a repaint in the black costume. Now, is this simply just a case of repainting this figure, or is there enough going on with black costume Spider-Man to make it worth your while? We're going to find out in this review. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I present to you the 2018 Marvel's Spider-Man cartoon, Black Suit Costume Spider-Man. You know, before we do anything, we're going to figure out how tall Spider-Man stands, whether he's in the black costume or his original costume. The figure stands at about 5.5 inches in height. And of course, because he is the black costume version, we're going to bring in the original Spider-Man that we had a look at in a previous review. At first glance, one would think that it's simply the same figure repainted, and actually it's not quite. They have done a slight bit of retooling, the very slightest of retooling, primarily in the chest. Everything else about the two figures are almost identical, if not carbon copies to one another, right down to the same gimmick that the figure has. Remember this Spider-Man? Remember how he did this? Yeah, a little on the weak side. He has a backpack you basically just press, and it's a soft plastic, soft rubber, and as you squeeze it, he shoots out his web. Releasing the button, he retracts the web, so it does do something. It's a little on the weak side, yes, but at the very least, he does do something. Getting this guy out of the package, the black costume Spider-Man, and getting it out of packaging, I use the term very loosely. It literally was just a case of taking some clips, some nail clippers, and clipping the straps that were on the front, and you just simply take them out of the packaging. But I thought this guy was broken initially because his webbing didn't work right away, didn't work right off the bat. As you can see, though, pressing the button on the back, he does do it, but he doesn't do it as well as the original Spider-Man. A lot of times I find myself kind of just get in there, to tuck it back in just so it would actually do something. But gravity doesn't work well for neither of these figures. In fact, the webbing seems to work a little bit better if you have the hand straight up. And even then, the black version of Spider-Man here just doesn't do it as well as the original costume. So yes, the Spider-Man itself, if we look at the two figures side by side, for the most part, they are just one figure copied over and given a black plastic treatment instead of the blue and the red that we have here. It is until, however, you look at his torso right here. And this has not been repainted. As you can see, that the indentation lines here of around the webbing or around the logo here. It hasn't been painted, rather instead it's been retooled. Basically this whole torso area here has been remolded to accept the additional webbing that's been added, the additional logo here. Because if you look at Spider-Man, it's not simply a case where you can see right here, it is outlined. If they had done it on this Spider-Man, well, for starters, you also would have seen the smaller spider emblem happening right here. So it's actually not the case at all. I would really like to be able to say that everything, like there's other key differences between both figures, but ultimately it really isn't. It's not to say it's a bad figure, but ultimately it is just resculpting one aspect of it and everything else being, you know, the same Spider-Man figure. The head sculpt is good. Of course, not taking any information from the source material because I really don't watch the cartoon. Am I the only one that feels like there's yet to be a good Spider-Man cartoon in the last few years? Between Ultimate Spider-Man and now the Marvel's Spider-Man, there's just something about those two cartoons which I just have such a tough time watching. I have watched a couple of episodes, but not nearly enough to get a good first-hand opinion of what happens with Spider-Man in the black costume. I would normally have jumped to the conclusion that Spider-Man would have had a smoother outfit, but it could be a lot like the Spectacular Spider-Man, which I find to be a much far superior show. It could be just simply a case that it's just a painted over where you still have the webbing showing here on his body. Detailing for the fact that it is really a carbon copy minus this part. It's a nice looking figure, of course, for the fact that it is very limited when it comes to its posability. Luckily, like what I mentioned in this figure review here, the backpack, the gimmick if you will, doesn't necessarily hinder the figure. He's already hindered by the fact that he doesn't have posability in anywhere more than just the arms, the legs, and a ball joint in the head, which is about the only superior, no pun intended, superior articulation that we have in the figure here. Everything else is relegated to just simple swivels, which is really disappointing. Kind of wish that these figures could have soared to higher skies and higher limits by getting, at the very least, hingeable arms, hingeable legs. A hingeable arm shoulder here would have guaranteed that this gimmick would have not worked one bit. But it's not well that the gimmick works very decently or very well at all anyways. It's just simply a case of you're pressing the button and this little tiny bit of flossing, tooth flossing, ends up sticking out of the web shooter here. The web shooter is the exact same as Spider-Man's. Paint is generous, but not sufficient enough to cover over the black plastic. Unfortunately, the black peeks its way through just a little bit. Paint on this guy's a little harder to grade because, quite frankly, the majority of the figure is all black. You get the little bit of white, but the primary color of this guy is all the molding of the black plastic. So there's really not a lot to get excited about, but I do have to admit that the design of the costume, the mold itself is actually quite good. So even at the very least, if you don't get a lot of paint happening here, the white coloring, which looks as actually if it was molded on its own, but looks like it's probably just paint. The paint of the white on the eyes and the chest is more than enough to actually make this figure a really nice looking release. It still has the same problems that this figure has with very little in the way of posability. And if you can get over the fact that, yeah, they are pretty much carbon copies of one another without a few swaps out of different colors, then, you know, this is a nice looking figure. It's clearly geared towards more the children, because children don't certainly mind. And I say this solely as what the manufacturer is thinking to themselves. Well, kids don't mind the fact that he's limited on posability. Kids love the fact that there's a gimmick. Well, I know there's lots of kids out there that also like posable figures, so as much as gimmick like this doesn't hinder the figure, I think a kid might favor maybe this swapped out altogether, something that's got a little bit more articulation going for it. Normally, looking at a figure like this, I would have right out said it was a pass. A cheap way that a company has taken an existing Spider-Man mold and getting the most bang for their buck out of re-releasing him in the ever-reliable black costume variant. Yes, there's not really much differencing this guy between him and the original costume Spider-Man that we looked at in this review. Although, to be fair, they did go the extra mile and not simply just go and sloppily painting a white logo across the chest. No, instead they actually did go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and they re-sculpted a new chest piece. So at the very least, I can say that, well, Hasbro tried. They didn't just simply paint a logo over top of a very obvious previously original costume Spider-Man. So like the small spider emblem on the original costume is nowhere to be found here on the black costume variant. I would then say, again, it was a pass to get this figure, but to be fair, it's a nice sculpt. Sure, it doesn't have the posability that I would have hoped that these new Spider-Man figures would have possessed, but it's still a nice looking mold. I felt that way looking at the original costume Spider-Man. I feel the same way looking at black costume Spider-Man here. So I don't think this is a figure necessarily that's a fail. It's lazily made, yes, because the company just simply reused the existing mold, but I guess it's to be expected. What do you really want for a black costume Spider-Man? They can't really go back and give us a brand new mold. Why should they? But this is a mold that's good enough on its own that even though it is just simply a repainted figure or remolded figure, I think the black costume Spider-Man works, at least from the scope of the model that they use. The mold looks good, so therefore a repaint or remold of it actually works well just as much as the original. So I would say pick up this figure if you like black costume Spider-Man, but just know going into it, it's kind of geared towards kids, so poseability on this guy will be slightly limited, just the same as his original version, the original costume Spider-Man. Today we were having a look at the Hasbro 2018 Marvel's Spider-Man cartoon. That's a mouthful. Today we were having a look at the black suit costume Spider-Man. If you guys want to see what's up and coming on this channel, future pickups, and maybe what I'm doing out and about, I know it's a very Canadian thing to say, you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook. If you also haven't had a chance to hit that little subscribe button down below, it's literally just below this video. Make sure you do so. Many more videos will be coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.